My name is Jerry Gill. Today is February 19th, 2010. I'm visiting with Jackie Bennett Holmes in her sister's home here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This interview is for the Old State Stories project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Jackie, I know you live in Florida, and I appreciate you taking time for this interview on your trip to Oklahoma. You're a member of a family that's very special to Oklahoma State University, the Bennett family. Dr. Henry G. Bennett, your grandfather was president of OSU from 1928 until his untimely death in 1951. Dr. Bennett and his wife Vera had 5 children, Henry Jr., Phil, Liberty, Mary, and Thomas. You're the daughter of Henry Bennett Jr. and Josephine St. Clair. And as I understand from our conversation, Nancy, you're perhaps the oldest living grandchild of the Bennetts, is that right?
Yes, I was the oldest anyway.
Oldest grandchild, okay. First of all, Jackie, before we, of course, certainly want to talk about your grandfather, but we'd like to learn a little more about you and a little about your early life. Can you share some of where you grew up, a little bit about your family, your early life?
Well, I was born in Baltimore. My father was at Johns Hopkins Medical School, and then he took 5 years of additional training there. So I was, at that point, going to school. I went to the Calvert School in Baltimore, and which is still in existence, and it is still an excellent school. And in 1941, we moved back to Oklahoma, and Daddy was in practice for 1 month before he was called in to the service, and we joined him in Virginia, having departed Oklahoma on December 7th, 1941. So actually my early days were spent with my grandparents. I spent every summer there for probably 8 years, and then I spent a lot of time when we lived in Oklahoma City as well. But I spent all my summers there.
So you got a chance to know them very well.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously. Growing up, Jackie, were there some values that you learned from your immediate family and from your grandparents that were important to you, that helped shape you in your later life?
Well, I would say that education was the primary objective, and excelling in everything that we could do, and also that there was nothing we couldn't do. I think that was instilled in us from the first, to have high goals and not to ever think that you couldn't do something.
Right. Jackie, what schools did you attend, or did you attend a class in high school here in Oklahoma City?
Yes, I attended Nichols Hill School, Harding, and Classen High School.
Okay. Were you involved in some student activities in high school, community activities you remember?
Oh, yeah, I was involved in a lot of things, but I really don't remember the connections.
Been too far back, huh?
Right.
Now, when you attended school at, your first year, did you go to Oklahoma State University, or did you go to?
No, I only went to Oklahoma State, which was Oklahoma A&M, for 1 year. I graduated from Wellesley, and I spent my first year there, and I came back for the second year, and then I went back to Wellesley.
So was the reason for you coming back and spending that year at Oklahoma State after that first year? So you were at Wellesley for a year, and then Oklahoma State for a year, and then back to Wellesley?
Right.
Was there a reason why you chose to come back and go to school at OSU for a year?
Well, I was interested in being at the school just for a time, but I was very interested in going back to Wellesley.
Certainly, because your family connection and history with your grandparents. Would you have been, when you were a senior, I'm trying to think how old, when Dr. Bennett and his wife died in the plane crash, how old were you then, Jackie?
I was I guess 19 probably, and I was a junior in college.
So you felt that in a very special way. I mean, indeed, it was your grandparents, but you're actually a student there at Oklahoma State or at that time.
Well, yes, I was there, and I saw a lot of them at that time.
Jackie, when you were at Oklahoma State, what was your major there? Do you recall?
I was always an art history major at Wellesley, but I took a great deal of many other courses there, such as physics and economics and things like that.
Were there some faculty members you recall from your time there?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Were you involved in any activities or
No,
social
not
organizations?
really.
Can you tell me a little bit about your Wellesley experience?
Well, I was an art history major, and I enjoyed the experience. It was a very, I guess, a high-level academic experience. And they had wonderful professors, particularly in the art history department. And they also had what we refer to as general examinations. At the end of the 4 years, you had to take a test which supposedly joined everything that you had learned there. So you had to really study for every course that you had ever taken there.
Wow.
And it was an incredible experience because you just did pull it all together.
Kind of like the German experience in higher education is the way they do theirs the same way. The finals at the end determines for that whole 4 years whether you pass or fail. A little bit of pressure there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Jackie, going back to your Oklahoma State experience when you were there, did you live with your grandparents when you were going to school there in 1 year?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you live on campus?
No, I lived in the Pi-Phi house.
Pi-Phi house, okay. Great. And so now I understand that Nancy said she went to Kappa, to the great chagrin of the rest of the Bennett women.
Yeah.
And a great tradition, I think, as I recall, of being in the Pi-Phi house. Yeah. Can you share a little bit of Jackie after you graduated from Wellesley, a little bit about your life journey and a little about your professional career?
Well, I actually went to New York after I graduated, and I was in the advertising business for about 4 or 5 years and did market research. It was a very timely thing because market research was just developing at that time, and I was able to be a part of that growth, and it was a great experience. I love New York, and I married there, and then went back. Came back to my husband's hometown, which was Jacksonville, Florida.
You're with, I'm trying to recall, is it JFA Fine Art Today? Is that
It's called Jacqueline Holmes and Associates, Inc.
And what are some
I'm
of
a
the
consultant, and I developed the business from a gallery, which I started in 1962, and then developed it into an art consulting firm where I mainly advised corporations on buying art. And my primary client early on was IBM, and I did buildings for them, probably 13 buildings from Vermont to Florida, and a lot of banks, and we also worked with AT&T. Right now I am a curator for the Bank of America and help them with their art program.
Jackie, do you do any artwork yourself personally?
No.
So your career started off pretty much in advertising, which is a little bit interesting shift for you in the New York market. At what point did you begin to change your emphasis in your career from advertising and marketing to more into artwork?
Well, I did it when I moved because there was no opportunity for advertising in Jacksonville, Florida at that time. And we had a good friend who was an architect who had become a collector of art and was very interested in Southeastern artists. And so that's the way we began the gallery, to represent fine artists in the Southeast, because there was very little opportunity for them to show in that area. After that, I dealt with artists who were more widely known and very well-known artists. We did actually, one of the more interesting things that we did was the Pennsylvania Convention Center, which is an odd place for art, but they had a very large budget, the largest budget for public art in Pennsylvania, and we were able to do some really fantastic commissions of art, and also to buy art for the project.
Jackie, I know when you're working with customers, of course, yours, whatever their taste and what interest they have, but for you personally, do you have some particular artists or art forms that you like better than the other?
Well, I sort of grew up in the abstract expressionist age, and I am very interested in that kind of art. I put together a very large public or private collection, which is in Jacksonville, Florida, and it is pretty outstanding, I think. And I did that in addition to the corporate art. So most of my work was outside of Florida, but this is one opportunity that I had to buy abstract expressionist paintings, and it's a good collection.
Are there some artists that names people would recognize in that field?
Mark Rothko, Hans Hofmann, Robert Motherwell, Helen Frankenthaler. Those are among the most outstanding artists of that period.
Do you have any feel, Jackie, for where your interest in art came from? Do you have it as a child growing up? Did you always be interested in art?
Yeah, I had been, and the only opportunity that I had growing up was to actually do it. And I did take studio courses, but I found that my real interest was in the history of art.
Have there been some career highlights for you, Jackie, in your field, some special recognitions or honors maybe that you've received that you could share with us?
Well, not really. I've done a lot of things. I've been on the board of the Art Museum and vice president of the board. I was chairman of the board of the Ringling Museum, which is the Florida State Museum, and I started the Arts Council in Jacksonville, which is now called the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville, and I was president of that, and just a lot of things like that.
Pretty responsible positions. Could we shift maybe gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your parents and first of all, like your father? What do you remember about your father, his personality, personal traits that you recall?
Well, he was a very intelligent person, and he really spent most of his life working as a doctor, and he was a gynecologist, which is an unusual specialty without doing any OB. but that was his interest, and he trained with one of the great doctors in that specialty, Dr. Talend at Johns Hopkins. And he didn't really have a lot of other interests other than reading, and he saw some of his contemporaries dying of heart attacks at early ages, so he took up fishing, but I'm not sure that he ever really enjoyed that much. He loved to travel, and we took a lot of trips across country. Starting in Oklahoma, we could go east one summer and west another, and we covered a lot of territory. It was very educational. I've never enjoyed driving in the car since then.
I cured you then.
Right. And but we went to every state in the United States except North and South Dakota. But most of that was done after the war.
Your father, didn't he graduate early from college? I mean, he was young when he graduated.
Oh yeah, he was 18. And he was the youngest person ever accepted at Hopkins Medical School.
Do you know, Jackie, how he was able to, I guess he would have then entered OSU or A&M at the time when he was like 14, 15 years old?
14, yeah. Well, I think the reason was that in Durant, they had the school attached to the college. And so they didn't have much else to do, so they went all year.
So summers year round he would...
Absolutely. So he just finished early.
Wow.
He graduated
Incredible.
from high school. And one thing that he lacked for medical school was he had not taken any German. And at that time, most of the texts were written in German, or a lot of them were. So it was a requirement to have 2 years of German. And so he managed to get that qualification in 3 months.
That sounded like his father when he got his PhD in 1 year. And some good genes there in that family, wasn't there?
Right, yeah.
Well, I understand that your father was highly thought of in Oklahoma City area and very...
Yes, I think he was.
He was affiliated with the Baptist Hospital for many years, is that right?
Yes, he was chief of staff from the beginning until he died, which was probably 25 years.
Do you recall, Jackie, any stories that your father used to tell about his family, his brothers and sisters, and his parents when he was growing up in Durant or in Stillwater or in Hugo?
Well, I guess one of the real stories, and this has a lot to do with my grandmother. Granddaddy traveled a lot and was very tied up a lot, and so he didn't usually take trips with the family. So I guess there was a trip planned to Colorado, and he wasn't able to go. So my father was about 12 at the time, and so he did all the driving, including going up Pikes Peak.
At 12. So Henry was the oldest child.
Yeah.
Right. But at 12 years old, he was driving a family car.
And my grandmother would never have thought a thing about it. You know, she just had confidence in it, and she was not one to worry about anything.
She was a pretty good driver herself. She'd drive down to Oklahoma City an awful lot by herself in the car.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Did your father ever talk about his growing up in the home there in the presidential home? Was that different? I mean, you know, he was a student going to OSU and living in the president's home.
He never talks about that. No.
Never. It had to been a little bit different experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, but of course I stayed there a lot. I was there all those summers.
What do you, Jackie? What do you remember about your mother? Josephine St. Clair, I guess was her name. What do you remember about your mother?
Well, she was a very nice lady, and she had to take care of us, particularly when Daddy was off in the war, and I'm sure that was difficult. It was a very trying time for her, and she was not a person of who really liked to do things much. She was a very home-oriented person, and she had some very good friends who lived here, and that was really important to her. And she took part in all of our school activities, but she was not a very outgoing person.
She grew up in Perry, is that right?
That's right. Youngest of 5 children, but I think that the youngest one was 10 years older than she. So she was kind of like an only child. Where was your father assigned? Do you remember World War II? What theater he was in? Oh, yeah. Well, at first he was in Virginia, and then he was assigned overseas, and actually went to California for a while, and Mother went out there because they were delays, they were not shipping them out as soon as they thought. But he went to Australia and then to New Guinea, and he was stationed with an infantry corps, gynecologist with an infantry. And then he, unfortunately, New Guinea was a very serious battleground, and before he got there, our side was not winning, and there had to be a lot of retrieval of dead soldiers, and he had to participate in that. But he then got malaria and was sent to Australia, and he kind of got lost in the system, and he found out that a lot of his buddies from Hopkins were in Sydney. They had formed a unit, and they had a hospital and all. So he managed to get himself assigned there. So he spent about 2 years in Australia, in Sydney. So I think that was it was a positive experience for him, because he loved the Australians, and he really got a lot out of that. He always wanted to go back, but Mother was not one to travel halfway around the world, but I think he really enjoyed it.
Jackie, you can kind of change subjects a little bit and move towards your grandparents. Talk about Henry and Vera Bennett and your memories there. Did you, from our conversation, you must have stayed fairly frequently in the home, and certainly during the war you spent a lot of time with the Bennetts in their home in Stillwater?
Well, yeah. When we were living in Baltimore, I went every summer and spent the whole 3 months there. And then after that, when we lived in Oklahoma City, we were over there a lot. But I really, just day to day, we went on trips, we went, everything was very positive there, and I spent a lot of time with my Aunt Mary, who was only 12 years older than I was. And she just spoiled me rotten. And grandmother and granddaddy did too. We would go out to Yost. Is that still there?
Still there.
Well, we spent a lot of time swimming at Yost, and then Crystal Plunge. We went swimming there, and then we'd come to Oklahoma City. Granddaddy had a kind of a suite in the Skirvin Hotel where he'd have meetings and stuff. And I remember it had sliding doors, and I was fascinated by those. And then we'd go to Spring Lake, which was an amusement park at that time. And I remember I saw the Wizard of Oz there. And then, as I say, we went on some trips. Sometimes grandmother would come up to take me back to Oklahoma on the train. And that was always fun. And then one time, granddaddy took me back. And we stopped in Cincinnati. He was meeting with his publishers. And so the secretary got stuck with me and was told, I guess, to buy me anything I wanted.
Oh, a good deal.
But I bought a leash for my dog, which was in Oklahoma. They had bought a puppy for me, and he stayed there in Oklahoma. His name was Budgie. So I bought him a leash.
Jackie, when your parents were in Baltimore and you were spending summers, how old were you in those years?
Oh, I was, as I say, I probably started when I was 2 years old. And then I went on till I was 9. And then I spent, a lot of time, but not the whole summer when we lived here. I don't know, I just wrote down a few things that I remember. I remember going to Rochester with him. He was plagued with Granddaddy, he was plagued with laryngitis. And he really had a problem with it, where he was doing so much speaking.
Yes.
And so he went up to Mayo Clinic, and we went up there with him in Rochester. And I remember being impressed with the fact that you could go downstairs into the hotel in the basement and then walk across through a tunnel to Mayo Clinic.
Jackie, you spent a lot of time in the president's home. What do you remember about the president's home?
Oh, I remember very well.
You kind of talk about the layout and kind of what it was like.
Well, originally, the bedrooms, I think there were about 5 bedrooms upstairs. One of them was designated as the guest room. I stayed there sometimes. And then Tom had a room, and Mary had a room, and Libby had a room. Libby's room was later turned into the silver room, where grandmother had cases for all her collection of silver, which was very, very extensive. And then granddaddy had his library up there, kind of an office, and a lot of bookcases. It was just really huge library. And then I think there was a porch outside where sometimes we slept, kind of sleeping porch. And then the downstairs was a huge kitchen and a big dining room. And I remember it was always set for about 12, because Granddaddy always brought people home for lunch. And the cook was Dora, who was about 200 pounds and 5 feet tall. And then her husband, Y.C., would serve. And then various of her sisters would come in whenever needed. And then there was a living room, a big living room, and a sun porch, and then a music room. My Aunt Mary played the harp, and then various people played the piano. So that was called the music room. And then there was a basement, which is where students were often bunked, and anybody that didn't have a place, grandmother would always invite them in. And a lot of the Indian students, now we call them Native Americans, but she called them Indians, and she went to an Indian school in Durant, and she was always very, very interested in the Indian students, and they gave her many, many things, many objects, paintings. I'm sorry to say that they were all given to OSU, and now they can't be found. I don't know what happened to them. But she was very interested in those people, and there was always somebody down there and sleeping, or they had just beds. And I'd sleep down there sometimes in the summer when it got really hot.
Jackie,
No air conditioning.
You're telling that story. I'd heard that a lot of times it's just a student, a guest, drop in. I mean, it wasn't unusual at all to be feeding people, having to spend the night, just happen to show up. Is that true?
I don't remember. I mean, students would sleep downstairs, but I don't remember too many people coming and sleeping upstairs. Maybe some. But definitely lunch was the big meal of the day, and Granddaddy would bring people home then.
Could you describe a little bit what a meal was like when you had the formal sit-down meal there in the dining room?
Well, fried chicken was a big item, and cornbread, and biscuits, and always potatoes and vegetables, and so it was a big meal.
And I heard that Dr. Bennett himself sometimes he would get up early, that he sometimes cooked breakfast or fixed biscuits himself. Do you remember that?
I really don't. There was usually oatmeal and biscuits and stuff for breakfast, but I remember Dora usually was there, even for breakfast. And so one thing we did in the early morning, though, was go out and look at the cows and the pigs, and just take in the barns out there. We would, the part of A&M, and we always enjoyed that.
What do you remember? Some special get-togethers I heard on Sundays. A lot of times the family would drive up and get together with other family members. What do you remember about family get-togethers and socials there in the home?
Well, once we lived in Oklahoma City, we would go over there for lunch on Sundays sometimes.
Pretty regularly.
Fairly regularly, yeah. And then some of the other people who lived in Oklahoma City or Stillwater would come as well.
I understood that sometimes if there was not enough room around the table, they'd have a card table set up maybe around it to make room for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Did Dr. Bennett kind of preside over was it fairly formal, those events, or?
Not really formal. I mean, he always sat at the head of the table and said a prayer, and but otherwise, I would consider it to be pretty informal.
Talk a little bit about your grandmother Vera. From what I've heard in other conversations, she was a pretty special lady. And what was she like as a grandmother? I mean, we would think of her as a public figure, but as a grandmother, what was she like? What do you remember about her?
Well, she would do about anything you wanted her to, and she was very relaxed, and I remember I used to walk around the campus all the time, you know, unsupervised, roller skate and do stuff like that. Whereas my mother would be supervising me. She wouldn't have me wandering around. But grandmother just didn't have any nerves, I don't think. And she just assumed everything would be okay. And so she really was very relaxed, and but she was always very giving, and pretty much anything I wanted to do, she would do.
Kind of the ideal grandmother, sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. And one time, Granddaddy was going out to fly to a ranch. I think it was Governor Turner's ranch, with the Flying Farmers of America, and they were all gathering in their planes. So we were taking, my grandmother and I were taking him out there, and he said, "Would you like to go?" I said, "Well, yes, I'd love to go." I had never flown, nor had grandmother. And when she realized that I was going, she said, "I'm coming too."
What do you remember about the flight?
I mean, it was...
It had been exciting for you.
Well, yeah, it was very exciting, and it was a small plane, very small plane. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. And then we went over there to the ranch and had lunch, and then flew back.
I understand that Vera was a strong Christian.
Mm-hmm.
She taught Sunday school class, I think the women's Sunday school class here in the First Baptist Church. Did she ever spend time with you in your faith development, like reading Bible stories or reading the Bible or through prayer? Do you recall?
Well, I think she did some, but it wasn't an overriding thing with her. In other words, she didn't spend all of her time there doing that. She had a lot of interests, and she pursued them, and she was probably the original women's, not a liber, but she really was very strong on women's ability to do anything they wanted to. And I think that was a pervasive thing. I mean, she just did everything.
Was that a strong influence on you, Jackie, as growing up as a child?
Yeah.
Saw this strong figure.
Yeah, she was definitely, I think that I probably got a lot of values from her, and she really, she didn't think that there was anything that I couldn't do. So she was a very gracious lady, and she loved stylish clothes. She really did. And she always wore the latest thing. And she loved shoes. And she loved her silver. That was really a very important part of her life. She and Tom actually would go to the East Coast, Virginia, and North Carolina, South Carolina, and they would dig around in these antique shops. And she had a man in, I think it was Boston, who would re-silver a lot of things. In other words, a lot of the very fine English silver is silver plate. In other words, it's not sterling. Sterling is very soft. And so the pieces that have survived, many of them are plate. You've heard of Sheffield plate, stuff like that. So she was able to buy these things which would look very tarnished and worn, and then send them up to this guy in Boston, and they come back looking like new. But I don't know where she ever found him. But she had priceless pieces. Nancy probably told you that all of ours were stolen.
No, I did. I was going to ask you what happened to the collection.
Well, she had always planned on having something for every child. And she had 5 silver tea services. She had 5 wine tankards. You probably saw some of it over at Leela's house.
Yes.
And and then when she went to South America, she had commissioned silver, solid silver, and this was more silver than sterling, because down there they have a different kind of process, and it was very soft. But she had serving plates, which nobody uses anymore, service plates, salad plates, and finger bowls.
Wow.
Commissioned. And there were 12 of them each. And we had those, but it was all stolen.
Someone stole this from coming in the home and stole it? Oh, gosh. So Leela has some of the other grandkids.
Yeah, all the other people have
their silver.
Have their portion, but ours was all lost.
That's a shame. Now I understand that she was what we maybe call nowadays a power shopper. She was a pretty good shopper. She enjoyed shopping. Did you ever go out on some of the shopping trips with her?
Oh yeah.
What was that like?
Well, she had very good taste, and she enjoyed buying nice clothes, and she bought things for me too. And Granddaddy actually bought her clothes too. He had an incredible ability to buy something that fit you. He bought my 6th grade graduation dress. Never asked the size, and he just bought a beautiful dress.
Just right.
Right. And when he was in Paris after the war, he went to one of the salons and picked out a model who looked about grandmother's size and had her try on different clothes. And he brought her several nice outfits.
Oh, what I bet she was excited about that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was an incredible shopper too.
Well, Jackie, speaking of your grandfather, what do you have some? What do you remember most about your grandfather? You know, not the public figure, but as a person. What do you remember most about your grandfather?
Well, he was around. He would be at the house during the luncheons, and but he would also be traveling some, and I don't know. He just was a very kind person, and he was also had a good sense of humor, and he enjoyed talking to people, and he talked to me a lot. He was just a very enjoyable person to be around, but he was very oriented toward his business, which was running the college, and frequently people would come to the house to meet with him.
Did you ever go to his office?
Oh yeah. I loved to go to the office, and I was particularly intrigued with office supplies, and I would always go over and come back with a big pad of paper and pencils and stuff like that. He would let his secretary give me the run of the office supplies, and so.
And understand from visiting Nancy that if he wasn't seeing a person at that time, didn't have an appointment in his office, that you had Andre just to go into his office and
Yeah,
see him, which
I
is
would.
a little unusual. You think about that,
Mhm.
particularly in today's society, that'd be very unusual.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
walk in anytime in the president's office, and was he pretty accommodating? If he was busy, but he'd say hello and let you just sort of play in the office.
Oh
or-
yeah, yeah. We spent a lot of time over there. Yeah.
What other?
Well,
qualities-
another thing that I guess I was thinking I was going to mention was when I was a campfire girl, we sold donuts, and I didn't particularly like going door to door, so I decided to call Granddaddy and ask him if I could call one of the dormitories and get an order from them. So I got 100 dozen. But one time he turned me down one time, and that was when we were all going around collecting scrap metal,
Mhm.
and I wanted to win again. And so I had always noticed the cannon sitting in front of the engineering building. So I thought that might be a nice piece that we could add to the scrap metal pile. But he didn't let me have that.
That was off limits. Oh, gosh. Well, what did you spend a lot of time on campus? You'd been what, about grade school ages
Yeah.
this time, and so you just Theta Pond. I guess do they still water the animals at Theta Pond at that time still?
We used to go down and catch tadpoles down
Mhm.
there. I don't remember what else. Of course, one thing that Granddaddy did was plant all those weeping willows, and everybody told him that they wouldn't grow, and he planted a lot of those, and magnolias too. And I remember those weeping willows down by Theta Pond. But all I can remember doing down there was catching tadpoles.
Was like his wife, Henry was a strong Christian, and he taught the men's Sunday school class, I think, and his wife there taught the women's Sunday
Yeah.
school class. What do you remember about his faith and his spirituality?
I don't know. I mean, he didn't make a big deal of it, you know? I mean, neither of them did, as far as, I mean, they taught the Sunday schools, and but they didn't unload it on you. I guess I was always aware that we were a Christian family, but they didn't make me go to Sunday school every week. But
Did you ever go to your grandmother's Sunday school class when she taught?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Your dad was he led by example in his faith and his life, but did he ever visit with you and share some of his philosophy about life, or some practical advice that he might have shared with you?
I don't think so. You know, it was just. I think that he just shared that by example. You know, we always knew what the rights and wrongs were, and he didn't lay it on you. And I think that, I mean, there were certain rules, like we couldn't go to movies on Sunday, we couldn't play cards on Sunday. I think that swimming was looked down upon, but I think we got around that.
This was this Crystal Plunge, is that what it was called at that time? I think you indicated earlier you went to Yost Lake.
Oh, yeah.
We went to Yost. And
Yeah, we used to go to Yost a lot. And we sometimes went on the train, Puddle Jumper. And, eye problem. That was fun. I always used to love that. But most of the time we went by car.
Would there be like a family picnic you do when you got there, swim, picnic?
Yeah, usually I went with my Aunt Mary, and sometimes Emmerdale, who was to be Tom's wife, she would go with us, and we would just swim and have lunch. I don't remember whether we took lunch or whether we ate out there.
When you look back, and you might not have realized all of it at the time, but looking back, how did your grandfather, Dr. Bennett, influence your life?
Well, I think he gave me very high goals, and I think that learning, of course, was very important to him, and getting a good education was primary, and also giving back to the community. And I've tried to do that. And I think he just, he set high goals. He was certainly a person who attained many of his goals, but I think he always had more. And I think he passed that on to us. I think that all of us felt like we had to achieve well.
Was this part of maybe the background of your interest in going to Wellesley, which was certainly one of the premier women's universities, and still is today in the United States, to get all the education, get as high quality of education as you could get?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he encouraged me to go to Wellesley. And he was glad that I did well there, and as I say, I spent 1 year at OSU, and then I went back. But it was an important thing to me.
Were you? I guess you were old enough at the time, Jackie, to probably know how special an individual he was. Obviously, president of the university, but then he became director of the US.4 program. Was this a source of pride for you, knowing that he held these positions, and not just as a powerful figure, but that he was that involved on an international scale?
Yeah. I was in college at Wellesley at the time that he took on that .4, and I was very proud of him. And of course, he did achieve a lot. When he was at Columbia getting his PhD, he met John D. Rockefeller. He went to his Sunday school class, and they became very good friends. And he went home with them and had dinner, and he became very good friends with Nelson Rockefeller, and they kept up. And so he was very well connected in that way.
I had not heard that story. So your grandfather actually attended John D. Rockefeller's Sunday school class. Was Rockefeller was the teacher of the class and attended. Now this is two Sunday school teachers getting together. Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Did he ever share any insights about that relationship?
Not really. I just knew about it, and I don't know. I think John D. Rockefeller used to spread coins around to the children. You know, he liked to do that, and he was very devout Christian, and I think the church, St. John the Divine, is primarily funded by Rockefellers.
So Nelson was John D's son, so he got to be good to know Nelson as well. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then he get, if I recall, in about a year's time, he did about a 3-year doctoral program. I mean, he really.
Yeah, I
condensed
don't.
it.
I think it was 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think 1924, 25, something like that, or maybe 26.
Amazing. How did you hear the stories about his relationship with Rockefeller? The reason I asked is that had not come up in conversations with the rest of the family. That's
I
interesting.
think he told me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Interesting. So you were a junior, you were a freshman, a freshman at Wellesley when he was appointed .4 director in 1950. That'd be about right.
You know, I thought it was later than that, but I was a freshman at Wellesley in 1950.
50. Okay, that'd be about right. Okay. Well, what do you remember about his philosophy of .4 International Technical Educational Assistance?
Well, the main thing was don't give it away if it can't be used. And so I think the theory was certainly to educate people, and in more ways than technical, but certainly to teach them to use the tools that we were going to give them. And I think that the present administration could learn a lot from that, because I don't think that we've followed that rule. Giving money doesn't always do the job.
They try to make you friends.
Yeah, I mean, Haiti is a perfect example of it. They're worse off than they were, but they were pretty bad off before. But what they need is education, not just money.
Jackie, picking up on your conversation about your grandfather's philosophy, Dr. Bennett's philosophy of .4, you talked a little bit about our current, and probably I could say for the last many years, of international relations in terms of he was director of the .4 program, which is the direct predecessor of USAID today. How do you think, would our program be a little bit different? Would it look a little bit different now if we used Dr. Bennett's philosophy? And in what ways would our international technical assistance programs, how would they be different? In what ways would they be different?
Well, I don't know a lot about what the present day thing is, but I don't think that they are influenced by the need for education as much as he would emphasize that. I think that that's, to my mind, the core of all international relations. If you can educate people so that they can think clearly and do things, that's going to make a better world. And I don't think that a lot of areas in the world are getting that education, particularly the so-called third world places, which is what he was working in.
Jay, do you remember anything about his travels when he was director of .4?
I remember just the South American trip. Now, he went to Bavaria, but I think that was before .4. I think that he was just asked to go over there to assess their agricultural situation after the war. I'm not sure whether that was a part of the .4 or not. But he did go certainly to Ethiopia several times, and of course started the college there.
Jackie, how did you hear about the plane crash?
Well, I was at home, and I was on vacation, and Daddy had a phone call early in the morning. frankly, I don't know who it was from. We were talking about that the other night. I'm not sure who it was from.
Did you attend the memorial services in Gallagher Hall?
You know, that is a blank in my mind. I don't think that I did. Because I think I was back at school. Daddy was funny about funerals. He didn't like them, and he didn't go to them. And, you know, I just don't know whether I went or not. I can't believe that I can't remember, but I don't remember.
What was your dad's reaction, do you remember, to the news and how he dealt with that in the following days and weeks?
Well, the first thing he did was go make his rounds at the hospital, and I went with him. And he just didn't talk much about it. So, of course, Granddaddy always loved flying. I remember when he would come to Baltimore, he would come to Washington, and he would always come to Baltimore to see us, and he would fly from Dallas on an overnight plane. They had berths, all that. And so he really loved flying. And it's kind of ironic that he met his death there.
He was one of the proponents and one of the leaders, as you indicated earlier, in the Flying Farmers nationalization, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very, very key in that. I think he kind of made it happen.
And the interesting connection between he and Will Rogers, they were both very much aviation enthusiasts.
That's right,
and promoted air travel, and both wound up losing their lives in airplane crashes.
Yeah.
Jackie, from your perspective, had a chance, as a young person, but now looking back through your life and your personal knowledge of Dr. Bennett, what do you feel is the legacy that he's left as an educator, as a statesman?
Well, I think that he certainly made his mark on the university, starting off with that 25-year plan. I think that just set the stage for growth of the university, college as it was. And I think that he just meant to make it the best that it could possibly be. And I think it was better than anybody ever thought it was because of his efforts. I think that his interest in statewide politics benefited the college because he was very well connected, and obviously the funding for the 25-year plan as well as all of the other funding came from the state, and well, not all of it, but I think that his connections around the state made a lot of difference in making that college what it was. Of course, he started the community college idea. I know in Florida there are community colleges all over, and I think that Granddaddy's was the first that I ever knew where he would establish a small college, or not college really, but a school where people could learn trades. People who might not be qualified to go to college, but they certainly were qualified to learn to make a living and to excel in something. And I think that was important to him.
Jackie, what about his? I've heard it said that his approach to international education as Point 4 director was pretty similar to his land-grant philosophy of there's a natural outgrowth of his life and his presidency at a land-grant university in terms of teaching people about how to raise food, about how to create a better life for themselves. And do you have a sense of how he felt about that?
Well, I think he felt strongly about that. I mean, obviously that school was designed to create people who could utilize the land in the best way possible, and also to provide the technical knowledge to make it produce more. And I think that was an underlying philosophy that he had, that we all need that. We need the food and we need the technical knowledge. And beyond that, I think, though, that he did feel that the liberal arts were important. In other words, it shouldn't be just agricultural and mechanical. I think that he felt strongly that people should have at least some exposure to the knowledge of culture and other aspects, literature, and so on.
From your early memories and what you knew about later about your grandfather, President Bennett, what stands out in your mind about him as a person, as a public figure? What values guided him and directed him?
Well, I think we've already talked about that. I think that he certainly had values and goals, and I think that he felt that anybody was capable of achieving a goal. It might be different for different people, but through education primarily, I think that he felt that people could better themselves and make a better life for themselves. And I think that he felt that education was the key to that. And I think that he really felt strongly about that.
Did that little bit go back, do you think, Jackie, to his father, who was an itinerant Baptist minister, to where he grew up in Arkansas, and his family roots is in terms of people moving west, in terms of people creating a better life for themselves, and he saw education as one of those tools to help people improve their condition?
I think so. I don't know how strongly he was influenced by his parents, but I've always had a feeling that his mother was the strength of that family, and she really managed everything. And his father was, of course, the religious person, but I have a feeling that his mother got the food on the table.
Did you ever hear any stories about his mother?
Not really. I don't remember him talking about her, but I've heard other things, from other people who read them. I think that she was a pretty strong woman. And I think that he married a strong woman. And, her education was amazing,
Particularly as you indicated that for that time.
Yeah.
To have a master's degree.
Yeah. The University of Chicago. Can't imagine how she ever figured out that she wanted to go there.
How did you know about how that came about?
I don't know. Really don't know.
Did she go and was she able to do it some of it at a distance, or did she actually on campus at the time?
they didn't do stuff on this long distance in that day that I know of, and so I would have to think that she went up there. But I never heard any conversation about that. I really don't know.
Jackie, the other thing we talked about in terms of education being a core value of Dr. Bennett, his personal faith that we talked about earlier, was that one of the values that carried him, that was one of his pillars that made him special, do you think?
I think so. I think that it was a strength of his, and I think he built on it, and I think he was always concerned with doing the right thing, and he built his life around that idea of always doing the right thing.
Another thing I might ask you about Jackie, that being around him probably more than the grandkids maybe had a chance to know him, his sense of, I keep hearing you say, a sense of fairness and equality, and in the way he treated people. I mean, he was a president of a university, an important political figure in the state, and then certainly an international statesman. But that where did that value come from? That he felt a connection with, if you will, with the common man, and was that from his family backgrounds, his roots, do you think?
Well, it may have been. I think he was his own person. I don't think that anyone in his family had ever achieved at the level that he did. And I think he was a very ambitious person, and he believed that he could achieve what he wanted to, and the sky was the limit. I don't think that he had any feeling that just being a university president was all he was ever going to do, and he moved beyond that. And at a lower level, when he was a teacher, he always had another goal. So I don't know where that comes from, but I think that each person is born with an innate sense of himself, and some people just have higher goals than others, and I think he had very high goals.
It seemed like he never lost touch with the people, if you will. He still felt very comfortable at whatever level he achieved.
That's right.
He could
yeah.
relate to people at all levels of life. And
that's right. Yeah, he was, and anybody was his friend, and he didn't turn his back on anyone.
Other family members I visited with share a sense of specialness about being part of the Bennett family, and about the legacy of Dr. Bennett. Do you share that feeling, and why is that so?
Well, I'm very proud to be a part of the family. Unfortunately, I have not lived here for a long time, and so I have not had the opportunity to be close to other members of my family and close to the university. So I have not had that special quality of belonging in a way. But I've always been very proud of it, and I think that I've always been very proud of my grandparents.
Jackie, what else have we not covered that, I'm thinking in this perspective, we're recording your memories and your thoughts. You and some of your cousins, and of course Nancy, your sister, are some of the last people to really remember in a personal way Dr. Bennett and Vera. And is there anything else that we'd want to capture that someone 20, 30, 50 years now would want to know, if they were looking back trying to understand who Dr. Bennett, Henry G. Bennett was? Was there anything you'd want to add to that help to comment on?
I really don't know. He was a very special person, and I think that to describe him as a very ambitious person, but very low-key, he definitely had, as I say, goals to achieve, and he achieved a lot of them.
And maybe we touched on this, and if I'm forgetting, we've already covered it. Remind me, okay, Jackie. But I'd heard stories about his incredible work ethic. I mean, he could work into the wee hours of the morning and still be up at 5 a.m. Maybe only had
That's right,
3 hours of sleep, and could still sustain that over a period of time. It's an incredible sense of energy.
Right, yeah. Yeah, he did. He used to work up in that library at night, and it was just off his bedroom, and he would be up there after dinner most every night, and he really did. He spoke at so many places around Oklahoma and beyond. I do remember his always taking off, going somewhere. Usually Tom would drive him, or somebody would drive him, because he was always working.
So he'd be working on paperwork where Tom was driving the car.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When I was born, my mother was very sick, and my father had strep throat, which was very serious in that day. So they were both in the hospital when I was born.
Oh my God.
And they didn't know whether they were going to live or not. And so Granddaddy drove with Phil up there, and it was the dead of winter, December, and
this was in Baltimore. Baltimore.
Yeah, Johns Hopkins. So, I mean, there were tales Phil used to tell about holding a candle to keep the radiator going. I mean, you know, they drove all night, and I don't know. Might have been embellished somewhat, but anyway, he needed to be there. Granddaddy did, so he was very important. It was very important to him.
Did you ever know a time when he wasn't busy at something? I mean, I get the sense that, I mean, he took time, as you'd indicated earlier in some interviews, to spend time with grandkids, but still, I mean, he was always doing something. Either with the grandkids, whatever, he was just doing nothing.
Yeah, no, I don't think he was ever doing nothing. No, he didn't have any hobbies, or I can't ever remember him going on a. I can't even think of a trip that we took that didn't have a purpose. You know, it was something that he had to do. We went to Chicago one time, and I think he was speaking somewhere, and he always had something to do.
Jackie, what kind of a maybe last question is, you were, as the oldest grandchild and old enough, maybe high school age, to have some conversations with him. Can you recall some of the conversations you had with him, some of the things you talked about?
I really don't. You know, I think that we talked some, but I just really can't think of anything specific. I know we talked about going to Wellesley, and he was very encouraging because he was very familiar with the school, and he wanted me to go. And I don't know, he just, he always encouraged me to do anything that I happened to want to do. and maybe beyond that. One little incident I'll tell you, and I think we've got to go. Tom and Mary one summer decided they would order fireworks, and they ordered a huge amount of them. They kept them in a desk in the basement, and then somehow they got that whole desk out of the basement and put it out on the front lawn, and were invited all the neighbors and everybody there to see the fireworks. And so they started shooting them off, and rockets and all that stuff. And then a sparkler dropped into a drawer, and the whole thing went off. And it was a very spectacular thing. And I remember Granddaddy scooping me up and taking me back to the steps to watch. And the fire department came and all that. So that was the big event of that particular summer.
That's a great story. Well, Jackie, I appreciate it very much taking time to visit with me. Thank you.
Well,
is there anything else you want to share before we close?
I don't think of anything.
Thank you.